Just a little bit about myself. I was born in Wakefield, Kansas. Lived there 18 years of my life, and that's between Junction City and Fort Riley. Halfway moved out of the Milford Reservoir area in the 60s. I served in an enlistment in the U.S. Marines when I came right out of high school. I have college education and degrees from Emporia State, Kansas State, and Indiana University, and primarily in education, but history and social sciences was a background. I was employed in the educational media field with the Olathe Unified Schools, Johnson County Junior College, and most recently was in the University of Kansas School of Medicine when it started down here in Wichita, and I retired after about 30 years of service for the School of Medicine. So I'm a member of several historical societies, including Valley Center and this Historical Society, Wichita and Sedgwick County, and the Genealogy, Midwest Genealogy Society, and the Kansas State Historical Society. So I'm enjoying history. I'm enjoying it as a pastime to research. I've been married to my wife, Kathy, seated over here for 49 years, and we have 5 children. I enjoy studying and presenting local history information, mostly about mid-Kansas history. I like to use, like Brian back here, use dowsing techniques to search for historical clues, and I did a little bit of that with the AVI. Some of the other activities and interest, I like to go kayaking. We had about 300 kids out on the water yesterday down at Watson Park in Wichita. I like to bicycle. Once in a while I'll bike up here and back from between Valley Center. A little bit of hiking, gardening, and reading. So that's just a little bit about me. There's a lot of experts here. I know that coming from a railroad town originally, there's going to be some folks that know a lot about railroading and in the AVI. I hope that I can help open up some avenues for some new ideas, but I want you to be able to pitch in, ask questions. We'll have a question and answer mainly afterwards, but feel free if you see something that I didn't cover on the photo, just jump right in. So here we are looking at an electric railway, the old AVI. How many of you have ever ridden the AVI? I got to look for somebody that's over 80 years old, just about. I hate to. Okay, but I'll bet you know somebody that's ridden one. I know a lady here has talked about having really her husband, I believe, had ridden it from here to Hutchinson. And I'll talk a little bit about some folks that I have interviewed that rode it or know somebody that did. But it was pretty important when in 1910 when they started the AVI, important to the local economy, and it was a major factor in people's lives because we're still in a horse and buggy era almost, and we're just starting to transition to it in 1910 and on to cars, trucks, and other types of transportation. So there was an interurban before the AVI, and it was called the Wichita and Valley Center Motor Line from 1887 to 1889. Not many years. It was really about 2.5 years. You see that little car up there? That's a steam dummy. So the reason they built steam dummies, little steam engine inside of that car, and it was built so it didn't scare the horses. So this artist supposedly, was demonstrating that factor. But it looks to me like the engineers writing it backwards based on the way the steams or the smoke's rolling out. But they pulled a carriage from Wichita to Valley Center. They actually, in Valley Center, they came up with a motor line annex. We're going to have 260 lots there so that people could live there and go into Wichita and work or play or whatever. Well, that didn't last long because the economy went south by 1889 in the Wichita area. Here's another picture of an actual little car working here, a little steam dummy pulling some carriages. These weren't very efficient. You can see it didn't have a coal car or a water tank behind it. It had to stop every once in a while where they had piles of coal along the track or get some water. So it didn't last very long. Well, they generally, in the early days, to pull carriages, they used horses and mules. Well, I tell you, sometimes mules can be a little contrary. Horses, they have a mind of their own too sometimes. They can be rather messy and not always reliable. So I particularly enjoyed what Arthur Hetzler, Hertzler, I'm sorry, from over your neighbor over here, and his horse and buggy, his story about horse and buggy days. He said, he talked about mules, because he used mules once in a while to pull his buggy. And he talked about how they'll walk unmolested 2.5 miles an hour. But if urged, that darn mule might reduce this down to 2 miles per hour. And if urged too strongly, he may stop entirely, look back over his shoulder to inquire, what are you going to do about it? Okay. And horses sometimes have peculiar habits too. Sometimes they're just along for the ride. Well, this is an it's out around Denver area, and it was an actual line that went up a fairly steep line up a hill, and they had to have the horse pull it up. But the horse got the ride down while the men operated the brakes from the rear there. So kind of an interesting process. Well, we do have some rather interesting ties to electric railways, electric trolleys, in the basis of James Oakes Davidson. He was an early businessman in Wichita and in finance here, and he thought a lot. He says, we'd like to come up with an electric streetcar. So he worked hard to change the motive power for the Wichita streetcars, which used those mules and horses. So he hired an engineer to design a streetcar that was powered by an electric motor. And his early efforts failed, but later he was successful. And so Wichita and Davidson were one of the first electric-powered streetcars in the U.S., next to, I think there's one in New York. Let's get to the AVI, because here's an electric railway, the basis of Davidson's early work and others. It was primarily an electric railway. They did use diesel power in the last few years, and it was in operation for around 30 years, from 1910 to approximately 41. You'll see 42 mentioned, but the line had a bridge washout in Wichita, about over 60 miles, counting most of the rails. And they mainly started out carrying passengers and less than carload, being your mail, your creameries, your cream and eggs, and newspapers, so forth. They got into bulk carloading, hauling later. So we know most of the major cities, Wichita, Newton, Hutchinson, and the smaller towns in between. Here's a map that I show. We had power stations. We originally got power out of Wichita from the old KG&E plant that was downtown, but and there was a substation at Valley Center. That power source changed and came out of the old Ripley plant that was north of, between Wichita and Valley Center. So we go on up to Van Arsdale, where there was a substation, and one over at Burton. There was electrical feed from Hutchinson over that way. The segments we had from 1910, we had Wichita to Valley Center to Sedgwick and on up to Van Arsdale, named after the original president of the line. We had the 1911, and it was probably another year when they finished it. We had Newton and Halstead added. Halstead was actually installed first, that line. Newton was a little later. There was a little harder, they had a little more difficulty getting some of the land arranged, and they actually started planning this railroad in 1903, but it took a while to get land acquired for right-of-way. And then we had the line that went up to Bethel College, which didn't last very long, maybe about 10 years. Around 1923, they finally got permission to abandon the Bethel line from 5th Street on up north. And then we went on to Hutchinson by 1915, okay? So we start out, we have to use a little steam engine here to lay the tracks. They actually had an interchange started at Valley Center from the Frisco line, and they laid the tracks down from Valley Center down to Wichita. They originally used some streetcar tracks in Wichita, but they eventually changed that and had their own line all the way from downtown. Here it shows going in This is in Sedgwick, and you can see they're making that curve up here on the north edge of Sedgwick going to the stockyards. Oh, I'd say those ties are some old cottonwoods and a few other rather rough cut ties, but they laid that rail. They laid it fast. Some of it was a little bit rough. They really didn't have a very good base to it, and they suffered in later years on the roadbed. Jim Brower, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these people. That's why we're recording this. Jim Brower lives, and some of you might know him. He contributes to both this historical museum and definitely over in Sedgwick and Halstead. He grew up over there in the Sedgwick Halstead area. He sent this to me, and I've got a few other photos from him. This is not actually an AVI car. I believe this is a Hutchison car. This is Jim Brower's great uncle, and that's why he sent it to me. But the cars had a motorman. His job was to run the controls in the front of the car, and then they had a conductor, and his job was to collect money, get the people on and off, and also take care of the less than carload loading. And the trolley is really a little device up here at the top of the pole that contacts about a 600 volt line and brings the power down to the controls, and we have electric motors in the wheel sets. And the first cars on the AVI were pretty fancy. Up in the front, we had the motorman and his control. We had the little, it was a area where they'd put baggage of any kind, less than carload equipment. But this is the smoking section. They had smoking sections on these early cars. That's the window that's separating the area, and I don't know if they ever pulled the door shut or they even had one to pull shut. But these are generally 52 people cars, passengers, and so that's how they ran them. The first station down in Wichita, pretty basic. You can see they eventually moved it though to the Broadview, and this is on the west side of the Broadview, and this is the AVI building. It no longer is in existence. Later, in many years after AVI left this in the 40s, Cake TV started up here, and they had that for a studio for many years. You can see by the cars we're looking about 30s, I think, aren't we? The inside was pretty luxurious. They had all their offices down there. So looking across the river here, this is the Arkansas River. You look back and you can see where the cars could wrap right around a big circle here. Not a very good picture, but it shows how they'd come across the bridge here. By the way, this is Douglas. You don't see any Century 2 yet. This is the Broadview, and the cars would come in, wrap around here, pick up people and freight. They had a freight house that was on this side of the building, and they're right next to the Missouri Pacific line. They crossed it as soon as they got across the river. You know, across the river, let's see, this is the AVI. It's one of those piling type setups, and here's the Missouri Pacific. And this is the old Ackerman Island. AVI had their shops out here, and it was an island. It had the main channel here, but they had another channel here that ran on this side. So there was another bridge up here. The AVI ran on out. This was about 1920. Ran out on over and had a bridge crossing near the Seneca Street Bridge, and went on up on the west side of the east side of the river for a ways and crossed the Little River. In the Depression years, they filled this channel in right here, and they did it with pretty much with wheelbarrows. They hired a lot of men during the Depression for various types of work, and they pushed wheelbarrows and dug a little bit out off of this bank and filled in over here. This is the old. This is the old ballpark, and they had Wonderland was out here. There was a entertainment area. Here's the shops that were out on that island. Pretty sophisticated shops. I'm going to just mention the Forum here. We're going to talk about other attractions, but it was only a couple of blocks up Waco Street, and there were a lot of activities going on in the Forum. There'd be here's a horse show. They had all kinds of agricultural shows and various types of presentations and things. That was an attraction for people from all over the line or up and down the line. If you ever go out at Botanica now, I'm going to show some of the things that's still in existence, but this building was built by the Wichita Park Board and the AVI, and it was a stop for the AVI. and it's still in existence out there. And you can, if you go in Botanica and go to the right instead of the left, you'll see this building. They have a meeting room in here now. Just briefly, I wanted to show you the AVI ran up next to Arkansas Street, but it ran up Mascot Street. But it had a Y here. We need to know about Ys because a lot of the early AVI cars were single-ended. That is, they ran them primarily from one end. They ran them from one end. They could back them up a little, but they didn't. The motorman couldn't go to the other end and run it that way. But it had a side track that went down to Walnut Grove. So in 1910, they had a big air show, 1911, I'm sorry. And you can see we had some old cars parked here, but you can see the modern aircraft that they brought in, the old Curtiss aircraft. And they had quite a show. The AVI was running all of their cars, and they had to borrow streetcars from the Wichita system, and they put about 10,000 people out on this show. So it was a big deal. Here's an interesting thing. These folks are from the Israel family, and their spouses or friends, and they rode the AVI out here with those canoes. And I don't know how they got them in there. I think they might have had a trailer on the end of the AVI car, which was just kind of like a box car that would handle supplies. And they floated down the Little Arkansas from Sullivan's Grove, which is about where I-235 goes across the Little River on the north edge of Wichita. And these were what these little stops looked like. They were about 8 foot square, and you'll see one up here at the picture at Sand Creek here in a few minutes. You get up to Valley Center, well, they always had water. You folks fed the water down from the Little River, Sand Creek, and we had Jester Creek, and boy, water would fill up. But here's a little station. We're going to see this a little bit later. This is the only wooden station still in existence. There is actually an AVI car backed here, and it's back down the Y. Here's a car negotiating the Y in Valley Center. And see the motorman here, probably a conductor unless he was some kind of other helper in the this is the baggage or less than carload area. Then you see it must, even though we don't see any leaves on the trees, it must have been a little bit warm. Got the windows open. That's their air conditioning. And here's a good summer scene. I think this is between Valley Center and Sedgwick, and you see the folks riding it. We've got a pretty full car here. This is one of the early cars that didn't have the less than carload, but KG&E poles, you'll still see those today along a lot of the right-of-way where the AVI was located. Sedgwick was one of the busiest stations for less than carload and carload materials. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. The Sedgwick alfalfa mills was a big one. This would be your AVI track. This would be your Santa Fe side over here. Santa Fe train shown there. So again, here's another shot. Sedgwick had a lot of garden products, trees, nurseries there. They sold seeds, so they sold a lot that ran down the AVI. By the way, we got to talk about Lee Clerico. Let's see, we were just talking about him. He's about 101 years old and still going strong. He has one of the nicest collections of photos. He wasn't a railroad man in himself. His dad was up in the Santa Fe shops in Topeka back in the 20s. And he has some neat old photos of steam engines that his dad took when they were being refurbished. And really appreciate Lee donating many of these good photos. And Jim, of course, donated several. We're going across Sand Creek in the early days. Here's a car zipping along. And there's those big poles providing the power. Okay, when we get north of Sedgwick, we have a stop on the early AVI, we have a stop about every mile. And a lot of the stops were named after the farmers or after an AVI employee or usually an officer. So you'll find some interesting names. You come out of Sedgwick, there was a little stop for the stockyards. And then we get on up here, there's a little place called Hall. And then we get on up here, Van Arsdale. Okay, the line ran on the half section. And a mile before we get to Van Arsdale was a place called Briggs. And Briggs turned out to have a fairly active loading for grain and cattle. Van Arsdale didn't have cattle loading. If we go on north from Van Arsdale, then we'll find the line that goes on up to Newton. We'll spend some time with that. And the line split and went over to Halstead and on over to Hutchison. This showing a couple of cars waiting here at Van Arsdale. They had a wood depot. That depot burned later, and then they had their brick structure there that housed the powerhouse, and I believe they used part of that brick structure for a ticket place. But this is where you'd find a lot of exchanges. One thing we lacked for Newton was a lot of the traffic that came out of Wichita or came out of Newton or Hutch had to jump from one car to another to the Newton cars. So they might have a wait here. So incidentally, the reason I had this picture, let's see if these loading docks were so they could put the cream, the eggs, any other less than carload material. This is up at Burton. This is a cream can and some other materials that are going to be loaded in the cars. So those are pretty handy. They could quickly move goods from there. A lot of you have seen this old photo. I had to get it out of a magazine. I don't know where the original photo is. The AVI and the Santa Fe just didn't get along because they pretty well paralleled each other, and they kind of vied for the passenger traffic in early days. And so they didn't get permission. The AVI didn't get permission to have a ground level crossing on the Santa Fe, so they built this overpass or viaduct, and it was pretty substantial in its day. And I do recall reading somewhere where once in a while, if they get too many of these cars on the track, to pull them up the grade, they couldn't quite make the grade. Too much electrical power was being used at one point or the other. Well, this is a stop in your own backyard at Sand Creek, and you can't read that. If I darkened it, I could read that, but it is at Sand Creek, and I'm assuming this is probably looking east, I think. Let's see, the sun is this way. I forgot to, but anyhow, the AVI tracks are here. I like the hats on the ladies here. They're waiting for their stop, probably back in the early teens. And as it came in on the 5th Street here, it made a Y here. The original station was across from the Santa Fe, probably right in this area here. It was. And then later they moved it to an area over here. And that's what this says, Arkansas Valley Depot. It had a Y here. It was actually a double track over here. And it went on up to Bethel. Here's an early... This was shot by and put on fairly fancy paper by one of your early photographers. This car is I'll call it a work car, or it hauled freight too, but that's one of the first cars into Newton. And that would have been about 1912. And here's another set of cars when they actually were celebrating. A lot of people out. They're making the Y going, let's see which way they're going. Okay, you can see they're going up to Bethel, apparently. And so we see people watching the first cars there. One of the problems in Newton particularly, these things were street running. That is, they ran down the middle of the street. They had a lot of problems running into horses and buggies, and even, somebody would park like I read where there was a team of horses pulling a coal car, and the guy must have went into a bar or something. He left the coal wagon across the tracks, and they had trouble getting him back to get the team out of there. But they were always having, not always, but I meant frequently having collisions with cars too. This is the station right here, and we can see mills in the background. This would have been on East 5th Street, right across from the Santa Fe line. And I went down there and doused that, and I can tell you they had double track there. They had a double track in that area, a side track, but they could unload, and there was a dock over here. Right now, where this building is, I think it's a parking lot right next to a person with my name, but I don't know them, the Marshall's Furniture, west of the Marshall's Furniture store. But it goes right up to the railroad. The rails went right back up to the Santa Fe right away. And you'll see a sign right there where it stops. It says Amtrak line or something like that. There's another one at that same station. car number 5 was commonly used to bring people from Van Arsdale over to Newton and back. The next one, take a moment to load. It's a big file, but let's get it up here. And I don't have a picture of the AVI, but this is the Sanborn fire insurance maps. It shows AVI right here, and just on West 5th, while your Main Street would be right here, and Poplar is right here. I believe that's an empty lot right now, and I think there's an alley right here. There's a building behind this. The Mexican restaurant is here, and there's a vacant building here. I might point out, later on, the AVI tried to have bus and car and truck traffic. That would have been in the 20s, late 20s, and somebody wrote in here, this is the AVI bus barn. So it was real close to that area. Well, we did get up to Bethel with the cars, and it wasn't too well used. Not in the summertime. There wasn't much traffic, and they just, they turned the line. They stopped the line in about 23, I think it was. Now, Jim sent this picture. I'm pretty sure he did, and this is one. They tried a little bus, a little trolley car. You can see it's not a very big one. It would hold about 30 passengers or somewhere around that. And I believe this is snow. I believe it's in wintertime. And so you can see it looked kind of hostile out there as far as the environment. I don't see many passengers on there. So I have some thoughts about why Newton and the AVI fit together in early years, and maybe some that they didn't work out too well. I call it the pluses. So we had ties between Newton and towns, Halstead, Wichita, and so forth, with businesses, family, friends in all of these communities. There was government ties here in Harvey County because there were some transactions that had to be done here in Newton. So from your major communities, Halstead, Sedgwick, Burton, had to come over here to do business, so they could ride it. There was an Arkansas Valley High School basketball league that started up in the teens, and it included Newton, Wichita, Halstead, I believe Hutchinson, and there was some out off of it, but the early teams used to ride the AVI to and from their various sites. There are some recreational facilities, Veterans Park a little later. Everybody heard of Classon's Grove? I'm going to try to point out where I think it is. But how about Pandandy bread? Anybody eat Pandandy bread? Well, they shipped a lot of it apparently on the AVI from the Sartoris Bakery. Possibly things that didn't work as well. There was no interchange here with the local railroad. Santa Fe wasn't interested, and the Missouri Pacific up to the north didn't. That line wasn't very well used until they hit oil down in El Dorado, and they started running a lot of oil up to, I guess, probably northwest of here. McPherson, yeah, they started that, yeah. And, the Santa Fe Railroad had pretty well most of the major industries wrapped up. So the AVI didn't have access to any major industries, like anything like grain or livestock handling or other types of manufacturing. Well, poor roadbed on the AVI. One man thought the ride on the AVI could be compared to a weekend drunk on spiked pail. He claimed he was pitched and tossed until he regurgitated. The AVI, in its wisdom, for some reason, put the rail splices on the same tie. Then most railroads didn't do that. They put them on alternate ties. And so after a while, you started getting this dipping down on where the rail splices were. So it didn't ride too well. So just want to. And Clara Mae Midge. Let's see. Let me get caught up here because there's a little bit more. She rode the cars numerous times, just like the lady told me her husband rode it. She rode it many times up and down the AVI, and she talked about visiting her sister there in those years. She reported that everyone was so nice. The cars were always clean and warm in the winter. She said, I thought it was a marvelous way to travel. So that's nice. She had a good time. But Carl Chapman is a little different. And by the way, Mrs. Jones here helped me out a lot with some of these things. Said when I was going to high school, I had a 26 Model T and I drove it across the 5th Street wooden bridge over Sand Creek. It was kind of daring, and I think he drove it across the railroad bridge there. So he had quite a time. And he said, the other thing he said, I rode the AVI back and forth to school when I was in the 3rd and 4th grade for a short time. And I went to school at Lincoln School. I would run up to the depot on 5th Street to catch it at 4 o'clock. They were supposed to leave at 4, but would wait for me. When we got to the Moreland station, they would go on by. Morelands, do you recognize that name? It's out west on, I'm going to use the term Mud Creek, but what's Lazy Creek? Is that a renaming of Mud Creek?
Mud Creek.
Same thing. Okay, well, the sign says, yeah. So the conductor said the ticket had Thies Park on it, but not the Morelands. But they'd go a little ways past the Morelands and they'd let me off. So anyhow, we'll talk a little bit about Thies Park and some of those areas out west. Okay, going on here, I think we've got to get over. Oh yeah, he told, also Carl said in his letter here that he wrote to, my grandmother told me in Halloween the kids would grease the AVI tracks. Well, that was kind of a nasty trick. They just couldn't make it up the hill. I don't know if they had sanders on those old trolleys or not. Anybody know for sure? Well, here's what a ticket looked like from 1925 through 27. Let me turn it so we see a few of the stops. We see a stop named Royer. That was about a mile northeast of Van Arsdale. That would be, is that 24th and, I'm thinking of your north-south road.
West Street?
That'd be the next one over, not Hoover? Yeah, Hoover. That'd be about there. And I think Clausen's Grove was right next to that, within 2/10 of a mile, according to the information that I have. Hupp, there was a farmer named Hupp. Well, there's a farmer named Royer, and he was it was on his next to his property, I think. There was a farmer named Hupp close to the next station. And Thies was later a president of the AVI, and I believe that's pretty much Mud Creek in the area there. Nicholson, I don't know where that name came from, but that'd be close in, maybe up on 5th Street and Meridian or thereabouts, and then Sand Creek and on into Newton. So there's several other stops that showed up on early listings of, between Van Arsdale and Newton. Well, we're going to get over to Halstead. The big thing over there was going to the old settlers picnic, and I'll tell you, they really loaded a lot of people in those cars and brought them in and out of the old settlers. Some of people went to the hospital. Do we have the lady here that was, her mother, she was over at Halstead meeting when I gave this presentation. Her mother rode from Newton over to Halstead, and she was pregnant with this gal, and they had to deliver at Halstead for some reason. The doctor was there, and so they made it okay, but she was born in Halstead. And just we talked about several families. The Gatz family, they rode, and this was about in the 19 teens. They rode their spring wagon, so many miles to Newton. And I better read this here. William Gatz was a son. He was only about 8 years old. He remembers getting up early on Old Settlers Day, and they drove that 6 miles in the spring wagon with the parents and the 2 siblings to Newton. They left the spring wagon at the Newton livery stable. They boarded the AVI and they rode to Halstead. They enjoyed the whole day visiting, playing games, and running sack races and consuming that basket of food. Another interesting story, it had to do with Halstead. A new baby girl named Vivian was born at the farm home near Halstead in 1925. And Dad Leo brought the older siblings, and Gene, her brother, was, Gene was only age 5, the brother of Vivian, and his sister Ruby was age 3. So the dad, Leo, took them to the AVI station, put them on the train by themselves to travel to their aunt's home in Wichita. The conductor had charge of the children during the trip, but he said they made it fine. The aunt met them at the depot in Wichita, where they stayed for several days while the new mother and baby settled in. So Here's another little anecdote about Hutchinson, or the Halstead area. That during one cold winter, the heavy weight of ice on the phone line succeeded in breaking down the county lines, and in falling, the lines crossed those of a higher voltage AVI line, and north of town, the phone lines came in contact with that 660 volts or better than that, and did considerable damage. It was about midnight when Mr. Senseball discovered his phone was burning on the wall. He took a fireplace poker or a stove poker to pry the instrument loose and received a severe shock. He said others on the line had the innards of their phones destroyed. So that was tough times. Well, here's just a little scene, kind of a dismal winter scene, and this is the tracks going into Burton. Burton was a town that the AVI and the city fathers didn't get along. They wanted a stop at Main Street. Well, Burton wanted they wanted the depot at Main Street and AVI crossing, but the AVI wanted to put it next to the Frisco tracks, which crossed on just west of, right on the west side of Burton. And later on, there was some other problems. Actually, Burton in the 20s sued the AVI. I don't think they won the suit, but it had a lot to do with the cars crossing here not going slow enough. This is I got this from this museum, but this is actually Newton. We'll see a picture of this building again, you'll tell it. But this is where the station eventually was. George Thies was an interesting gentleman. He was the president, and he was really quite an entrepreneur. He was the director on, they said, over 40 boards of different Wichita companies. He said he was also the president of the Wichita Presbyterian Men's Bible Class, and they had a recent membership contest between two such classes at the church, and the winning class with the most members recruited would get a luxury AVI car ride to the opening day of the Hutch line. The losing class would have to ride in a cattle car. Actually, they didn't have cattle cars, but they put a boxcar on filled with straw, or enough straw in it. And the tragic thing about Thies was he was killed by an airplane propeller hitting him at the old Wichita Municipal Airplane. A man was flying the Curtiss, no, not the Curtiss. It was a biplane, and he didn't see him. And Thies was in a open top car and was out on the runway or close to the runway, and this plane came around, the propeller caught him and killed him. It was a sad situation. Okay, we'll look next at the expansion map, and this is only one of the expansion maps. I know there was one time in the 20s they wanted to expand the AVI lines to McPherson and Salina, or to Gossel and Abilene, Sterling, other places, Nickerson, Augusta. There were several big plans, you know. Even the line would have connected down to not all AVI, but down to Oklahoma. That never happened. That was never the situation. They just didn't expand. They did try using trucks and cars in the late 20s, trucks and buses, I'm sorry, for transporting people. And I do have a bus line schedule here that showed they had buses leaving from here going to Salina through McPherson and other towns along the way. Well, I'm only showing this because this shows the Santa Fe and the Frisco having a little problem here at Valley Center. This is the AVI line right here. And, so this was a situation that they ran into. Let me go back, say a little bit about, there were a lot of accidents on the AVI, particularly in the later days. There was, as you can imagine, many of the early cars, they didn't have whistles. They had a bell, and they had a light on the front. They added the whistles later, the horns. But a lot of the crossings they were grown over with the very poor visibility for the cars and the trucks crossing those rural roads, and they often ran into vehicles. And I've got a lot of information about various suits, people suing the AVI because somebody was killed. I'm going to mention old Hockaday. What's Hockaday have to do with Woody Hockaday? What did he have to do with the AVI? Well, not too much, except he was just one of those guys that wanted cars to take over, and so he worked on creating maps. He marked roads with various signs, how to get from Wichita to Hutch, and these were old sand roads in the good old days, and so he was quite active in that, and the advent of cars really was, and trucks, was the downfall of the AVI. So the AVI quickly went to hauling a lot of freight. Here's a towing engine, and it's these two cars were, I think, the only refrigerated cars they had, and they'd carry beef from the Cudahy plant in Wichita over to Hutchinson, and then they transfer from these cars, even though they might have been roadworthy, they transferred them to more refrigerator cars on the Rock Island, and they'd take it on clear down to Liberal and other places in Oklahoma. So there was a lot of grain that came out of Briggs, some grain out of Sedgwick, some cattle. They hauled. I'll show you some other things they were hauling. When they hit the oil in the Valley Center field, it was the right field, they started hauling a lot of tank cars of oil. They didn't have pipelines at the time. So
hauled out of Burton.
Yeah, that was the other field just west of Burton. They hauled a lot of oil too. So they was going to that Derby refinery in Wichita. I just want to point this out. This was during the heyday. This is Valley Center up here. You see a lot of the drills probably still going, the old steam engines, the old donkey engines working. Here's three lines. This is the AVI line. Whoops, excuse me, got to go back here. This is the AVI line here. You see the old trucks pulling a lot of pipes and things. This is the Santa Fe, and this is the old Frisco line. So it was pretty busy times, a lot of rail activity in those times. Well, unfortunately, we're going to start seeing the downfall of the AVI. Just showing this car because they started out with that Pullman green color. One of the visibility problems they felt was because it matched the darn trees and things along the way. So they painted them bright red and pink. Well, they said they faded to an ugly color, that it was just it was an ugly color of sickly pink and ghastly white, they called it, I guess. Car number 10, let's look at some of the cars where they ended up. Because what's happened with in 1938, the AVI had already gone bankrupt. They revived it. They sold the company to a Chicago company. It was a combined scrap firm and trolley company. It would operate railroads as long as possible and then scrap them. So they dieselized it. They put these little diesel engines on there, and they ran it for about 3 to 4 more years. The line operated about till 1942, and it washed out the Seneca Street trestle, and so the rails and equipment were sold. Well, let's look at this car, number 10. First, let's say, has anybody heard of Pullman Circle? Pullman Circle. That's up at Bethel, I'm told. And that's where several of these cars ended up right after the war, World War II, and the students lived in them because they had so many students coming in. They didn't have enough room for them. And they had a place called Pullman Circle. That's according to a person, and I thought maybe somebody.
North side of Bethel College.
Yeah. You still find a couple of old boxcars up there, and I can't tell you, they're up on the northeast corner, and they were off of some railroad, and I'm not sure they were AVI. But, well, car number 10 ended up over at, it was let's see, it started out, just a minute, let me look at my notes here because there's several cars here. It started out there at the Bethel, and then it went over to Peabody, and it was a cafe for a while along the tracks, along the road, Highway 50. Did anybody remember seeing that? It was in Peabody area there. So that's one of the cars, and it's gone obviously now. I'm going to say they pulled the tracks up by 42, And this all went to the war effort because of World War II. That's where the steel was going into ships and tanks and whatever. So it was gone. I want to show car number 8 because this is the last run. Just came across the bridge over the Arkansas River. The depot's over in this area here. Car number 8. It's the only one I've been able to track down. Here's what it looks like today. As of last week, I got a photo. Okay, so it was one of the cars that was used for housing up at Bethel. It was Dean Davis here. It was his dad bought it in Walton, and he kept it for many years, and then he sold it to these people in Manhattan. That's where this is at now, in Manhattan. I don't think that this was heating on the old AVI. I think that was, and I don't think that was in that position, but I think that was heating for the Bethel car, and I'm sure that was in the middle of the car when it was used for student housing. So, and if you've ever gone by the old Broadview on the west side, here's a AVI is still inscribed on above the old freight depot there, and there's a restaurant there named AVI now. So I'm going to show you. Okay, this is in Valley Center. This was that old station. It's still there. It's across from the library on the north side of the library, and it's been there for many years, and people are living there and have lived there forever. Okay, we're going to see a lot of cement bridges. You'll get tired of this, but this is over Jester Creek. Most people haven't seen this bridge because it's on a private land, but the farmer still uses it to go back and forth across Jester Creek with his equipment. I say it's the only bridge that's still used, so the AVI bridge. So over Sand Creek, you still have a bridge, and I can't tell you whether it had been used in recent years. Okay, this one's close to home, and you can easily see this today. So this is the Mud Creek Bridge.
Block from my house.
Yeah, so it's still there, and I got permission to get on the lady's property. And anyhow, they do have blocks on either side, but you can walk across it. And so these bridges go back almost 100 years and some. They're going to be there forever. They're going to be concrete monuments forever. Oh, by the way, does anybody know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm glad that somebody does, because I saw it there and I asked, what is that? I didn't have it. It's right next to the right-of-way of the old AVI. Well, that's an old incinerator that was built for the Morelands home. Does anybody? It was built there. It's across the creek from where the Morelands house was. That 7,000 square foot house burned back in '55, I think it was. So they built a newer one. Inez, what was her last name? Geiger, yeah, she built a newer one. But they maintain this. That's about 10, 11 feet high. It is big. And I thought, what is that thing?
For years they had a white porcelain toilet stool setting.
Okay. Well, they said it was for the groundskeeper to burn trash. Well, we're going to go west here. This is the East Emma Creek Bridge. So we're going to get on Road 36, and you'll see all these bridges along there, all of them. There's 3 of them anyhow. Here's the West Emma Bridge. Here they are about 2 blocks apart. West and East Emma come together. It's a wonder, but they just followed 36 here, so they must just had right-of-way. They could have gone south and gone across one creek where Emma joined together. You'll still see these poles feeding along 36 road, and you'll find that in several places along the old AVI right-of-way. And the big bridge across, this is across the Little Arkansas River, just east of Halstead. And it's the biggest bridge that there's still in existence. Phil just bought this here this year. Anybody? Phil Ellsworth. And he's an old railroader. Well, he's interested in railroading. I don't know if he's worked on the railroad. Does somebody know him that well? But he let us go through that. He still has, he's cleaning it up. He wants to remodel it. He works with model railroads, and he had one set up there recently when I did this.
He's a retired fireman,
Okay.
and he has model trains in there.
Right, yeah. So, I praise him. He's got the old AVI logo still up here. Obviously, this was taken a few years back. And then over at Burton, we'll still see that station there. This is the AVI track crossing the Frisco tracks here. And here's the one at Hutchinson I showed earlier. It's still in existence. It's on the National Registry of Historic Buildings. Well, I'm going to kind of move and say to a different, just to say that there's still electric railways. It's one I've ridden with my son. My son rides it every day, every work day, from St. Paul, Minnesota, over to Minneapolis. It saved him a lot of headaches. The traffic was terrible getting between those two cities in the early morning, especially at night. And so he really gets on there and enjoys it. He can do things. He might be calling us in the morning from the train. So there's quite a few of these electric railways that have come back in many cities. Here's the new one in Kansas City, pretty modernistic looking. So, and it just serves the downtown area. These are doing so-so, these electric railways, the streetcars, whatever you want to call them. A lot of people don't, if they get 2 blocks away from a station or their work, they don't want to get out and walk, so they want to drive. And so some are doing fairly well, others are not. You know, I'm going to have to kind of deviate here and wrap up. I'm going to say that sometimes we all look for simpler ways to do things, and we think back on the good old days in history, and I think children used to have the right idea. In their play, they'd come up with ways to travel and move about. And so here's some kids down in Valley Center a few years back, and they made their simple sled out of some wood, and they have a rope there. But let's go a step up. Here's a young lady. Tell you what, she knew how to travel. She's got some wheels on that wagon. I don't know whether she says giddy up or gobble up or what, but, and then here's a gal that used goat travel. She's still got the wheels. She doesn't look like she thinks the goats are ever going to get to her destination, but she has her friends with her, so she's probably appeased. I like Sam because Sam is, you're stepping up here. Sam's got the steer. He's got a lot of power for pulling, you know. And I think he'll get these kids where they want to go. The only thing is, Sam's getting kind of like the mules and the horses. They get a little bit messy. There's a lot more work involved. They get recalcitrant at times. They don't want to move. But that's the way it is. So I think I might be going into a loop here, so I better stop because I'm getting back to the horses and mules. So let's stop and see if there's any questions here. I'll be glad to answer them. I've got a few things up here. We could have the lights turned on, please. My sources tend to be some that you've got access to, and the AVI by Isley and Collins, but one that I really like, and you'll find in your library here, Trolley Through the Countryside. It's by Allison Chandler, and it has a chapter on the AVI. And Ernie Stedman was a depot agent in Sedgwick, and for many years he wrote about the AVI and kept records, and I can appreciate some of the things that he's done. There's a few maps here, a few articles. The old the AVI. Here's the effective Sunday, December 12, 1926, AVI Transportation Company. Buses from Newton to Salina and back, going through Lindsborg, McPherson, and Mound Ridge, and so forth, Heston. So some information like that. But one thing that I do, and Brian can understand this, I do go out and dowse and I look for the line, and I've mapped it out on your Newton map. So I've got it pretty well mapped out over to East 5th Street, and it ends there. And I can see where the station was and back to where the other station was on West 5th, clear out to end of 5th Street across the river. And I put little X's marks here where I've dowsed it, and I can find the tracks, the gauge of a railroad, about, was it 56.5 inches, I think, something like that. And then it gets out here at 5th Street and makes a wide curve around to behind that company makes sporks and other things. Yeah, and that's out at Conestoga Street, and it goes on down to the Mud Creek crossing. So I've got those kind of things that you're welcome to look at. But let's see, any questions or comments? Brian?
Presley was talking about Fifth Street. When they come to town, they want to go across Fifth Street, but see, Father said you can't do that, you'll scare the horses on that bridge, so they put a trestle, a wooden trestle on the south side of Fifth Street.
They had to make their own.
And then they tore that railroad up, and I was a kindergartner,
Uh-huh.
and that was 1944, and they just left the trestle with the tie plates and all,
Okay.
and that stayed there, I think, until the '65 flood.
Oh,
And they had tent and ash washed out and washed down that way, so they tore that old trestle.
okay. Okay.
And then there was another picture just before that Tyson that got hit by the propeller, that guy.
Yeah. These.
Just before that, it showed a trailer and a car on the side of the building.
Uh-huh.
And you said you thought it was new, but that was Hutch. That was right next to the building, that the last building you showed
Okay.
on your program.
Okay. We'll look at that here. I'll get back up. Okay. Brian?
Yeah, you had a map of the possible expansion routes,
Yes.
and I've been looking on newspapers.com and the old stories and newspapers, and I found dozens and dozens and dozens of articles about how they were going to expand.
Yes.
Up toward Gossel and
Yeah.
beyond Canton, whatever, and boy, we're going to turn dirt this week, and
Oh, yeah.
we're going to do this, and now nothing, and I couldn't find why. they did
Yeah.
it.
Well, they were really, that's when the automobiles and trucks were starting to bite into their business. They thought if they could expand it, they might be able to compete against some of the railroad passenger traffic. And at one time they were going to try to electrify the Missouri Pacific up to McPherson and then get on the Union Pacific, or was it on up? But anyhow, they get on the Union Pacific and go on up to Salina. They had a lot of plans, but they never had the money for it and never followed through. Other questions or comments?
I actually live near the K&O tracks
K-
on East 5th Street.
Okay, K&O, yeah. Uh-huh. Yep, that was the old MOP track, Missouri Pacific, I'm sorry. And they still run a train once in a while, don't they, I think?
Yeah, it's nice to see it. It's a very short train, but it's really cool. I've got
Yeah,
a couple of photos.
yeah, well, good. Okay, they've taken over. That's owned by Watco in Pittsburgh, Kansas. They have over 7,000 miles of short lines, one of the largest short line companies in the U.S. And they've taken over a lot of the other lines that the major companies, railroad companies, have abandoned.
And what's the name of that company?
Watco, well, K&O, and then you'll find North Kansas and Oklahoma down south, and several other names. Yes, ma'am. Did you have another question?
Yes, my mom was born in the early 20s,
Mhm.
but then she lived at Whitewater and she went to junior college at El Dorado.
Okay.
And I just wondered if anybody knows for certain what line she rode the train. That's
Uh-huh.
all we know.
Where'd she go to college at?
El Dorado.
Okay, so that would have been the Missouri Pacific, probably. They only ran about one train. Santa Fe at the height that was running in the teens was running about 10 trains between here and Wichita, and the same to Hutchinson. They had a lot of trains running. The AVI did connect in Hutchinson with several railroads, and a lot of people that rode the AVI over there, they got on the Rock Island because that was going southwest. Any other? Yes, sir.
I bought some property from the Royer family,
Okay,
immediately west of the Mud Creek Bridge.
okay,
And he showed me where they had put the fence posts in for the fence lines,
okay.
and they were green mulberry, and he sprouted up. I've got a 60-year-old mulberry tree.
Do
in
you?
my front yard.
They used to be the old AVI posts. Okay, neat. Yes, sir.
Did you have any lines like this in western Kansas? I had family who went from like Colby or Oakley to Jamestown,
Uh-huh.
up in that area. What road?
Well, Missouri Pacific goes through Jamestown. I think the K&O runs that now. I'm not sure. Some of you railroad people keep track of that. But it possibly was. The Union Pacific had a line up there also in that area, so they might have joined together, and I can't tell you. I'd have to look at that. Any other questions? Well, listen, I'll let you go enjoy the day. It's beautiful out, and I'll be up here to take any questions from individuals. Thank you for coming. Thank you.